Welcome to the sleep hours, the only place where cartoons fall asleep before you do. So grab your blanket, tuck in your favorite plushie, and let's get weird. Tonight we're going into the world of unknown, a place where forgotten souls wander and autumn never ends. On a crisp autumn evening, two brothers wander through a forest unlike any other, a place where lanterns glow faintly in the fog and shadows move in ways that seem almost intentional. They call it the unknown, but perhaps it is more than a place. Perhaps it is a mirror, a realm where echoes of the living, fragments of memory, and hidden truths linger, waiting to be seen. Wirt and Greg appear to have gotten lost. Yet their journey is not merely about finding a way home. It is about understanding the space between life and memory, between fear and peace. In this cartoon, the unknown is patient, mysterious, and hauntingly familiar. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every voice you think you hear may be a clue, a lesson, or a ghost. Join us as we step quietly into the forest, tracing the steps of Wirt and Greg, uncovering secrets hidden in plain sight, and exploring what it truly means to cross the line between the known and the unknown. The forest lay silent, yet not empty. Shadows stretched across the ground like fingers, twisting beneath the gentle sway of autumn leaves. Mist curled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and distant smoke. In this quiet, one could almost believe the world had paused entirely, holding its breath. Among these muted colors wandered two figures, small and uncertain, their footsteps light yet deliberate. One, taller and cautious, with hair like fallen chestnuts, led the way with hesitant confidence. The other, shorter and bright-eyed, skipped along, humming a tune that seemed too cheerful for the drifting fog around them. They were not in any ordinary forest. This was the unknown, a place where time did not follow the patterns familiar to the living, where the sun and moon seemed to pass in irregular, ghostly intervals. Every path appeared endless, yet strangely intimate, guiding travelers toward both danger and revelation. Those who stumbled here were few, yet every presence left its mark, like a whisper of memory or a shadow of regret. For Wirt and Greg, the unknown was a puzzle and a refuge, simultaneously comforting and unsettling, a place that reflected the inner workings of a mind stretched between hope and fear. Even as they walked, small details hinted that this was no ordinary journey. Villages appeared briefly through the fog, then vanished if approached too closely. Their buildings warped and irregular, as if constructed by memory rather than wood and stone. Occasionally, a figure would be glimpsed in a window or by a roadside, a flicker of motion, a whisper of clothing, yet when one drew near, nothing remained. These townsfolk moved as if tied to invisible strings, performing tasks whose purpose could never be fully discerned. In their silent gestures and muted expressions lay a strange familiarity, an echo of human life viewed through a distant mirror. The forest itself seemed alive with subtle intention. Trees bent slightly toward the travelers as though to guide them, while shadows flickered at the edges of vision, hinting at beings unseen. Leaves drifted without wind, and the fog thickened and thinned in irregular patterns, almost responding to the footsteps of the small explorers. A single lantern hung at the crest of a hill, its light warm yet contained, promising guidance but offering no certainty. Here the line between comfort and threat blurred. Every soft glow hinted at sanctuary, and yet, in its flicker, a warning seemed hidden. It was in this balance that the unknown held its power. Wirt, cautious and prone to hesitation, felt an uneasy pull toward the lantern's glow, as if it offered answers to questions he could not yet voice. Greg, innocent and unafraid, bounded ahead, finding delight in the slight rustle of leaves or the unexpected flash of a distant bird. Their differences, both in temperament and perception, allowed them to navigate the unknown together, though neither fully understood the rules of the space. Every step was measured, yet filled with the tension of discovery, the soft thrill of an adventure that carried undertones darker than the playful wanderings of a child might allow. Subtle patterns suggested that this forest was more than a mere landscape. It was a reflection of something deeper. Paths curved upon themselves, leading travelers past the same clusters of trees or over familiar brooks, yet never exactly repeating the scenery. Rocks and roots appeared and disappeared with quiet irregularity. Occasional glimpses of spectral forms, shapes that hinted at movement but remained undefined, suggested that the forest might remember, or perhaps record, the steps of all who walked its winding roads. In this way, Wirt and Greg were never fully alone, yet the company they sensed was never tangible, leaving a persistent, low hum of unease beneath their wanderings. Even the soundscape seemed deliberate. Wind whispered through the branches in ways that suggested murmured warnings or encouragements. The rustle of leaves carried echoes of laughter and cries that might have been real, or might have been memory or imagination. Somewhere in the distance, a creek gurgled insistently, its voice almost conversational, as if the landscape itself held knowledge of the traveler's purpose. Every natural element was both familiar and alien, comforting and ominous in equal measure. And over it all, the soft gray light of the sky, neither fully day nor entirely night, cast a muted glow, amplifying the feeling that Wirt and Greg had entered a world entirely apart, yet intimately tied to their own. In these early moments of their journey, the unknown was a gentle teacher and a subtle tormentor. Every corner of its fog-draped expanse suggested possibility, and yet hinted at danger. Towns that appeared briefly and vanished hinted at impermanence, while the behaviors of its inhabitants suggested lives paused, caught between states of being that the two travelers could not yet name. Even the smallest details, like the way birds watched silently from branches, or how the wind seemed to follow and then vanish, suggested a landscape aware of their presence, and perhaps aware of their condition. Wirt and Greg moved carefully, propelled forward by curiosity, by hope, and by a strange, unspoken compulsion that would carry them deeper into this mysterious world. As they pressed deeper into the unknown, the forest seemed to shift subtly around them. Branches arched and intertwined overhead, forming tunnels of dappled gray light that both guided and constrained their movement. Paths they thought familiar led them past the same knotted roots or moss-covered stones, yet never in the same order, creating a disorienting sense of repetition. Wirt paused frequently, brushing his hands along the rough bark of the trees, as if seeking reassurance in their solidity, only to find that what felt solid one moment could dissolve into mist the next. Greg, unaffected by such concerns, skipped ahead, calling out to shapes and shadows that might not exist, yet seemed to respond in kind. Their journey, though gentle in pace, carried the weight of subtle unease, an undercurrent of disquiet that clung to the fog and permeated the soft hum of the forest. The villages they encountered were equally strange. Small clusters of houses appeared nestled among the trees, their roofs sagging as if weary from age. Windows glimmered faintly, though no figure could ever be discerned with certainty. Occasionally, a villager would appear, a man carrying bundles of firewood, a woman tending to a garden, but their actions were almost too precise, too deliberate, as if following an unseen script. Conversations, when attempted, seemed to vanish before the meaning could take shape. Words lingered in the air, audible but intangible, leaving Wirt and Greg to grasp at fragments that dissolved like smoke. It was in these moments that the forest whispered most clearly of its strangeness, a world that mirrored life, yet obeyed rules only partially understood, a place that suggested presence yet hinted at absence. The subtle signs were everywhere. A bird perched on a low branch would tilt its head and vanish before either brother could reach it. Shadows moved in the periphery, stretching unnaturally across the ground, yet revealing no form when observed directly. Even the soft flow of water in the creeks seemed to twist unnaturally, as though carrying whispers from another time, or perhaps another existence. Wirt noticed these things more than Greg, whose attention flitted from one delight to another, yet even the younger boy felt a faint shiver when mist coiled unexpectedly around his ankles. The forest was not overtly threatening, but its quiet, deliberate anomalies hinted that the rules they relied upon, gravity, time, and distance, were not guaranteed. It was in these early wanderings that the first hints of their true condition began to emerge. In one village, Wirt observed a figure across the street, partially transparent, standing still with a gaze that seemed both sorrowful and distant. For a fleeting moment, he felt recognition, as if the figure were familiar yet somehow unreachable. By the time he blinked, it had dissolved into mist. These glimpses were subtle, easily dismissed as tricks of light, yet a pattern emerged. Wherever Wirt and Greg went, the edges of the world carried faint echoes of lives no longer fully present, fragments of existence that could not entirely touch the living. Even objects seemed to behave with intention. Lanterns glowed warmly but without fuel, doors opened without hinges turning. Leaves floated in impossible patterns. Small, almost imperceptible cues, an overturned basket, a feather drifting upward, hinted at a world governed by memory and perception rather than natural law. Wirt, sensitive and introspective, sensed the anomaly with mounting unease. Greg, by contrast, found wonder in the impossibility, laughing as a shadow streaked past him like a fleeting whisper. Together they navigated the forest, a combination of caution and curiosity that carried them along, never fully understanding what guided them, and yet never fully questioning the strange reassurance that each step brought. The fog thickened as twilight fell, cloaking the trees in muted silver light. Wirt and Greg paused by a small brook, its surface reflecting the dim sky, and watched as the water shimmered with a light that seemed almost internal, like the glow of a soul contained beneath the surface. The idea struck Wirt faintly, though he could not name it. Perhaps some of those glimpses, some of that light, were not just illusions of the forest, but fragments of a truth he could not yet comprehend. Greg, bending to peer into the brook, laughed and pointed at the glittering surface, seeing nothing strange, yet the ripple of light remained persistent and soft, suggesting that this world held secrets just beyond the threshold of awareness, waiting to be understood in time. The path wound upward, and Wirt noticed a lantern perched atop a gnarled hill, its warm glow distinct against the gray fog. It was the kind of beacon that suggested guidance, yet carried an unspoken warning. Each step toward it was deliberate, their movements cautious, as though the forest itself measured their intent. Around them, the shadows lengthened, and small shapes flickered at the corners of vision, appearing and disappearing in perfect rhythm with the fog's ebb and flow. There was comfort in the lantern's glow, but also a sense of being observed, not by the villagers or forest creatures, but by the very essence of the unknown itself, a presence that recorded and remembered every choice, every hesitation, and perhaps every loss. And it was there, walking beneath the gnarled canopy, surrounded by shifting mist and faint echoes of other presences, that the first unspoken question began to form in Wirt's mind. Why did this forest feel so intimate, yet so impossible? Why did every path twist, as if it remembered him, and yet offer no clear direction? There was a subtle weight to the air, a quiet insistence that their journey here was neither random nor inconsequential. For the first time, the thought crossed both brothers' minds, though neither could voice it fully, that this world, for all its beauty and oddity, might not be meant for the living at all. As they continued along the winding path, the forest seemed to respond to their presence in ways almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. Leaves rustled though the air was still, shadows shifted though no one passed, and distant lights flickered as if acknowledging their movement. Wirt's steps slowed, and he felt a faint chill, the kind that comes not from cold, but from awareness, a sense that the world around him held truths just beyond comprehension. Greg, oblivious to such unease, bounded ahead, leaving soft echoes of laughter that the fog absorbed and carried further than sound should naturally travel. It was in the subtle irregularities of the forest that the first real evidence of their otherworldly condition emerged. A village lay ahead, its buildings worn and faded, and as they approached, Wirt noticed something peculiar. None of the villagers interacted with them directly. A woman tended to her garden, glancing in their direction, but her eyes were blank, distant, as if seeing something they could not perceive. A child played nearby, yet vanished entirely when approached. It was not hostility, nor shyness, but a strange detachment, as though the world itself recognized them and yet could not fully register their presence. The effect was disorienting, leaving Wirt with a growing sense of otherness, a subtle awareness that perhaps they did not belong among those who were fully alive. Even nature seemed to confirm this quietly unsettling truth. Streams that should have reflected the sky instead showed vague, shifting images of other places, other times, and perhaps other lives. A deer appeared briefly at the edge of the fog, its eyes unusually bright, then vanished without a trace. Birds perched silently on branches, watching intently, their heads tilting in unison as if aware of Wirt and Greg in a way the rest of the forest was not. The forest did not merely observe, it seemed to record, to remember, and perhaps to guide or warn those who wandered its shifting paths. The lantern on the hill, which had been their distant beacon, drew them onward. Its glow was warm, yet it carried an uncanny quality, as though it recognized them more than they recognized themselves. Wirt found himself reaching toward it repeatedly, feeling an instinctual pull that went beyond curiosity or practicality. In the way one might be drawn to a memory long forgotten, he sensed that the lantern's light was meant not merely to illuminate a path, but to reveal a truth, that they were not entirely of the world in which the forest inhabitants lived. Greg, as always, was unfazed, laughing as he chased the dancing light upon the mist, yet even his joy could not mask the subtle anomaly of their condition, a growing awareness, unspoken yet pervasive, that they were part of a world neither fully present nor entirely absent. Passing through the village, they noticed more signs. Objects behaved peculiarly. A rocking chair swayed, though no breeze passed. A door opened silently and closed just as easily. Shadows stretched across walls with a life of their own. It was as though the village itself was a reflection, a construct of memory and perception, holding echoes of life without the certainty of continuity. Wirt paused by a window and saw the faintest outline of a figure inside. A man hunched over a desk, writing, But when he blinked, the figure had dissolved, leaving only the dim interior light. Greg tugged at his sleeve, pointing at the empty street with the curiosity. But the silent familiarity of what had vanished lingered, pressing subtly against Wirt's awareness. Even the air carried weight. The fog seemed thicker here, muffling sound and bending light into unnatural patterns. Footsteps left faint impressions, only to disappear moments later, as if they had never been there. Wirt and Greg were not invisible in the conventional sense. The world acknowledged them, yet only partially, like a memory half remembered. Every subtle cue, the vanishing villagers, the ghostly movements, the distorted reflections, added up to a single, unspoken possibility, that they were no longer part of the living world, moving instead through a space reserved for those caught between life and something else. As night deepened, the forest darkened around them, though never completely. Lanterns hung in the trees, casting small pools of warmth, yet shadows remained stubbornly near. Wirt noticed that the glow of these lights seemed to react to their presence, brightening slightly as they approached, dimming when they lingered too long. It was not magic nor mere coincidence, but subtle guidance, or perhaps recognition. The forest, in all its quiet omniscience, seemed to understand something that the brothers did not yet grasp fully, that they were traveling through a world meant to test, to reveal, and perhaps to prepare them for a state beyond life as they knew it. And in the distance, beyond the trees and the fog, a faint silhouette appeared. A figure watching silently from a hill, head bowed, lantern in hand. Wirt froze, sensing both fear and a strange familiarity. The figure did not move toward them, yet its presence pressed upon them, hinting at a truth too large to name. Greg, laughing, ran ahead, leaving Wirt to consider the unsettling calm of the forest, and the realization that they might be exploring a world that belonged not to the living, but to something far quieter, far older, and far more patient. A place where souls wandered, and the boundaries between life and what lay beyond were soft, shifting, and intimate. The closer they drew to the lantern atop the hill, the more the forest seemed to shape itself around them, as if the trees themselves were alive with intention. Branches arched over their heads, forming archways of muted light and shadow, and the fog seemed to swirl in deliberate patterns, guiding their steps without overtly forcing them. Wirt's hand brushed against the rough bark of a tree, and for a moment he felt a shiver that was not born of cold. It was recognition, or perhaps recollection, an almost imperceptible whisper of something lost. Greg, skipping ahead with boundless energy, seemed untouched by such intimations, yet even he paused briefly as a faint reflection shimmered across a distant pool, showing their forms not entirely solid, edges wavering as though caught between two worlds. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. The unknown responded to them differently than it might to any ordinary traveler. Villagers remained silent, their movements precise, almost rehearsed. Objects exhibited slight anomalies. Books opened to pages that changed when glanced at again, lanterns glowing without fuel, and chairs that rocked with no breeze. A small bird alighted on a nearby branch, eyes glinting with awareness before it vanished in a blink. The forest behavior was not threatening, nor was it welcoming in the traditional sense. Instead, it seemed to acknowledge their presence in a way that suggested knowledge, a quiet awareness that they were not entirely like those who moved through the forest in memory or in life. The lantern itself glowed with a soft, warm light that seemed almost sentient. Wirt approached it cautiously, sensing that it offered guidance not merely through the forest, but toward understanding. The glow seemed to pulse faintly in time with his heartbeat, as though responding to his hesitation, his curiosity. and perhaps even his growing awareness of the forest's truths. Greg, oblivious to such subtleties, danced around the base of the hill, pointing excitedly at the flickering light and laughing. Yet even his joy carried a strange undertone when viewed against the backdrop of the fog and shadow. The lantern was not merely illumination. It was a marker, a beacon, a container of something beyond mere light. It hinted at the fragile boundary between the known and the unknown, between life and something that moved quietly alongside it. The village at the foot of the hill offered more clues. A woman tended a garden, her hands moving carefully, yet her gaze never fully registered their presence. A man swept the street, pausing for a heartbeat as if to observe, then continued as though they had not existed at all. Wirt felt a faint tug of unease. Here were signs that they were visible, yet somehow intangible, partially acknowledged, but never fully. The realization began to press on him quietly, without fanfare. Perhaps their journey through this forest was not one of physical exploration, but of understanding their own state. Perhaps they were wandering not among the living, but in a space reserved for those caught between worlds, where reflection and memory mingled freely with the shapes of life. As twilight deepened, shadows lengthened, and the forest grew quiet, save for the soft rustling of leaves and the distant murmur of running water. Wirt and Greg paused atop a small rise, overlooking the mist-cloaked village. In the windows, faint silhouettes moved, brief glimpses of activity that seemed real and unreal at once. Wirt noted how the figures' movements lacked weight, their gestures too precise, too rehearsed, as if the world itself recalled them from memory. The forest held these echoes with a quiet patience, allowing the brothers to witness them without interference, as though letting them perceive what others could not. It was here that Wirt first glimpsed the nature of the lantern in its full implication. Not just a source of guidance, it was a vessel of memory and existence. Its glow contained echoes, hints of those who had come before, and perhaps reflections of those who would follow. The lantern seemed to understand their presence, acknowledging them, welcoming them, yet also reminding them of a truth too subtle to confront directly. Each step toward it was deliberate, weighted with recognition, a pull toward a revelation they were not yet ready to name. Greg, pointing excitedly at a flicker of movement in the mist, asked a question that Wirt could not answer. There was a pattern here, an interaction with the forest and the village that suggested not randomness, but purpose. The unknown was not simply a place, it was a crucible, a world shaped by those who wandered through it, and by the forest itself. And in that gentle, persistent guidance lay a single, quiet truth. Wirt and Greg were not entirely present among the living. The subtle anomalies, the vanishing villagers, the lantern's pulsing glow, the forest's knowing movements, all hinted that they were exploring a world not made for the living, but for those who moved between states, whose existence straddled the line between memory, life, and something beyond. And as night fully settled over the forest, stars dim through fogged sky, Wirt and Greg continued their ascent toward the lantern. Each step carried them deeper into understanding, deeper into the quiet tension of the unknown. The world was not hostile, but it was patient, aware, and deliberate. For Wirt, a faint unease pressed at the edges of his mind, a whisper that perhaps the journey was not merely about finding a way home, but about discovering the nature of their own existence. Greg, ever light-hearted, remained unaware, but even he could not escape the subtle truth reflected in the forest, the village, and the glow of the lantern, whose warm light seemed almost to speak, quietly affirming that their presence in the unknown was no accident, no random wandering. It was a crossing, a journey, and perhaps a recognition of what they had become. The unknown, for all its beauty and quiet majesty, carried subtle signs of a reality that was not meant for the living. As Wirt and Greg wandered deeper, the anomalies grew more pronounced. Villages appeared with perfect silence, the few inhabitants performing tasks with deliberate repetition. A woman swept her doorstep in continuous, almost hypnotic strokes, never acknowledging the brother's presence. A child chased a butterfly across a field, its laughter audible. Yet the moment they approached, both child and butterfly vanished entirely. It was a pattern repeated in faint, unsettling ways. The unknown was alive with motion, yet resistant to direct interaction. For Wirt, whose mind always sought order, the experience pressed upon him with a quiet insistence. The world was aware of them, but not fully capable of engaging. Even the forest itself seemed to reflect their difference. Leaves fell in slow spirals that defied the wind. Shadows shifted independently of form, and the distant hills carried echoes of voices that belonged to no one visible. Wirt noticed that his reflection in a shallow stream was subtly altered. His image lingered fractionally behind his movements, as if delayed or incomplete. Greg, ever innocent and unaware of the nuances around him, saw only the playful distortions in the water, laughing as he splashed. Yet for Wirt, the image was uncanny. It was not merely that the forest bent reality. It was as though the forest recognized something within him and Greg that the rest of the unknown could not fully reconcile. In the strange equilibrium, small details began to hint at a larger truth. The lantern atop the distant hill pulsed faintly, its light seeming to respond to their presence in ways more subtle than mere illumination. Each step they took toward it seemed measured by forces unseen, the fog swirling in gentle patterns that suggested awareness. Wirt could not name the sensation, but it pressed upon him like a whisper from beyond the conscious mind. This place was not random nor simply magical. It was structured, deliberate, and patient. Each movement through the unknown was both invitation and observation, as though the very forest was testing their presence, noting their passage, and quietly indicating that they were not entirely of the living world. Even the villagers offered subtle hints. A man carrying firewood stopped mid-step and turned his head in unison with Wirt, though he was across the street. Yet the instant Wirt blinked, the man continued his task without acknowledgement, as though his gaze had been merely an echo, a ripple of recognition from something beyond ordinary perception. A cat slinked past, pausing briefly to glance at Greg, eyes glowing unnaturally, then vanished into the fog. There was a pattern of partial perception, a threshold that Wirt and Greg crossed, one that allowed them to witness life and motion, but not fully participate. Slowly, imperceptibly, it became clear that the brothers' presence in the unknown differed fundamentally from the villagers and creatures around them. As twilight fell, the forest shifted once more, deepening shadows without diminishing the soft, muted glow of lanterns and phosphorescent lights along the path. Wirt and Greg paused beside a gnarled tree, its bark appearing to ripple faintly as though alive. Wirt traced his hand across the ridges, noticing that his touch left no mark, no indentation, no sense of weight. The anomaly was subtle, but persistent. Objects, creatures, and even the earth itself seemed to react only partially to their presence. In this, the forest whispered again, softly, insistently, hinting at the possibility that Wirt and Greg existed in a state not entirely aligned with the living world. The lantern on the distant hill continued to glow, guiding them onward. Its light seemed to recognize them individually, brightening subtly as Wirt approached, dimming when he lingered too long. It was not magic in a conventional sense, nor mere coincidence. The lantern held something of significance, a quiet intelligence that suggested knowledge of the brothers' true nature. Perhaps it reflected their souls, their lingering consciousness, or their unresolved passage between life and death. Greg, as always, remained delighted by the playful glow, oblivious to its weight. Yet even his joy could not escape the persistent sense that the world around them understood something he did not. Passing another village, Wirt noticed additional irregularities. Windows held shadows that moved independently. A clock ticked without mechanism, and a chair rocked gently, though no one occupied it. In one fleeting moment, Wirt glimpsed a figure, a man hunched over a desk, scribbling endlessly. Yet when he blinked, the man had vanished entirely. The forest and its settlements held echoes of life, but these echoes existed outside the parameters of normal interaction. They were present yet distant, aware yet untouchable. It was an impression of liminality, a whisper of the threshold between worlds. Wirt's mind, ever seeking reason, began to assemble these pieces into a quiet understanding. Their journey through the unknown was not only spatial, but existential. The trees thickened as darkness deepened, and with them came faint, shifting lights. They were not fireflies nor lanterns, but ghostly glimmers, floating in patterns that suggested intelligence. Wirt and Greg passed beneath them, and the lights seemed to respond to each movement, pulsing subtly in time with their steps. In these moments, the forest felt alive with purpose, not malevolence. Yet Wirt sensed its patience, the slow, deliberate observation of entities who perceived them as not quite part of the living, yet not fully gone. Greg skipped ahead, trailing laughter behind him that faded into the fog, and Wirt followed with quiet contemplation, both children moving through a world that existed for them and yet not entirely with them. It was here, in the gentle tension of twilight, that the first undeniable hints solidified. Lanterns pulsed like hearts, shadows stretched in ways that suggested memory, and the forest's creatures moved with awareness, too precise to be random. Wirt began to sense a truth he could not yet name. The unknown was not merely a forest, nor were its inhabitants fully alive. This place existed in the space between, a liminal world that measured existence in subtler terms than mortality. Every path, every light, every faint ripple of motion reinforced the growing understanding. Wirt and Greg were wandering not among the living, but among echoes, memories, and the lingering threads of souls caught between states. The lantern on the distant hill drew them onward with a gentle insistence, its warm light pulsing softly, almost rhythmically, as though attuned to their presence. Wirt noticed the subtle variation in its glow, the way it brightened as he hesitated, dimmed when he lingered, and seemed to guide them not just through the forest, but toward a deeper understanding of their own existence. The lantern was more than a light. It was a vessel, a keeper of essence, a symbol of souls in transit. In folklore, lanterns often guide spirits, marking the boundary between the living and the departed, and here in the heart of the unknown, it seemed to serve the same purpose. Wirt could not yet name it, but a quiet truth pressed against the edges of his mind. Perhaps they were not walking through the forest of the living, but through a world meant for those caught between life and something beyond. As they approached a small clearing, the village there revealed more clues. A baker's shop displayed freshly baked bread, steam curling upward in slow, deliberate spirals. Yet the baker himself remained behind the counter, motionless, hands poised midair as though frozen in time. A cat padded past, glanced at Greg, and vanished into mist. Wirt, observing closely, noticed that the figures moved with the precision of memory rather than life. Gestures repeated with a slight variation, glances that acknowledged him yet did not fully recognize him. These were echoes, fragments of existence, carefully preserved by the forests, and the subtle interaction with Wirt and Greg indicated that their presence did not belong to the realm of the living. Forest and villages seemed to respond differently to each brother. Greg, carefree and untethered by worry, interacted with the world in a way that elicited gentle, playful anomalies. A lantern flickering in rhythm with his laughter, leaves drifting around him in whimsical spirals, small creatures appearing momentarily as if to engage in his game. Wirt, more cautious and perceptive, detected a pattern in these interactions, an acknowledgement almost of something not entirely physical. The unknown was aware of them, patient and deliberate, guiding and observing in equal measure. The subtle insistence of these signs suggested a deeper layer, that Wirt and Greg's journey was existential as much as it was physical. A slow navigation through a space where the living were half absent and the departed half present. The symbolic nature of the lantern became more apparent as they ascended a gentle hill. Its glow was warm, but it carried weight, a quiet authority that suggested it could contain or reflect more than mere illumination. Wirt instinctively reached out, and the light pulsed subtly in response, acknowledging him, yet without human warmth. The sensation was uncanny, a presence felt rather than understood, as though the lantern recognized the brothers in a way no ordinary object could. Greg, jumping and spinning in delight at the flickering shadows, could not perceive this nuance. Yet even his laughter seemed to echo differently here, fading into the fog with a strange persistence, as if carried by something unseen. Passing through another village, the evidence grew more compelling. A man with a bundle of firewood paused mid-step, glancing in Wirt's direction. His gaze held the faintest recognition, but vanished in the next instant. A woman tended a garden, hands moving with mechanical precision, yet eyes blank and distant. These villagers were alive in motion, but not in essence. They were echoes, fragments of human life preserved by the forest, or perhaps by the memory of those who had passed. The pattern was unmistakable. Wirt and Greg could witness life, yet not fully inhabit it. The subtle interactions, the flickering glances, and the forest's patient observation all pointed toward a single, haunting conclusion. The brothers were not fully among the living. Even the creatures of the forest behaved with uncanny awareness. Birds tilted their heads, watching as the brothers passed. A deer stepped into the clearing, eyes bright and unblinking, then vanished when approached. The very ground beneath them seemed aware. Footprints left behind faded almost immediately, as though the earth itself recorded, but did not preserve their passage. Wirt felt a quiet tension building, a realization forming at the edge of consciousness. Their journey was not random, nor merely adventurous. They were walking through a world of souls, guided and observed by forces that understood them in ways the living could not. As darkness settled fully over the trees, the lantern atop the hill glowed with increasing intensity. Its light reached across the clearing, painting the fog in gentle waves. Shadows of the villagers lengthened and shifted, their motions precise, yet slightly unnatural. Wirt noticed that the more he hesitated, the more pronounced the anomalies became. Reflections that lagged behind movement, figures that flickered in and out of existence, and patterns in the fog that seemed deliberately arranged. Every element suggested a world that operated on rules separate from those of life, where presence and perception were measured differently. The forest, the villages, and the lantern were not simply scenery. They were instruments, reflecting and guiding the journey of souls caught between Liminal. In this quiet, twilight-laden world, Wirt's mind began to assemble the pieces. Lanterns as vessels, villagers as echoes, creatures as aware observers. All pointed toward the unsettling possibility that they were not alive in the conventional sense. The forest's subtle responses, the precise yet intangible interactions, and the gentle insistence of the lantern's glow indicated a liminal state, a realm that existed for those who had passed, for those who lingered between life and whatever lay beyond. Greg's laughter continued to ripple through the fog, carrying innocence and oblivion, but Wirt felt the persistent pull of truth pressing against his awareness. They were explorers, yes, but also something more. Travelers of a world designed for ghosts, caught gently yet persistently between existence and memory. The path ahead twisted gently, shrouded in mist that swirled with a will of its own. Wirt and Greg moved cautiously, though Greg's energy was undiminished, a bright contrast to the quiet tension pressing against Wirt's thoughts. The forest here felt alive with memory. Every step carried echoes of those who had come before, whispers of existence caught between being and non-existence. Wirt noticed subtle anomalies, the way shadows lingered just beyond the reach of lantern light, how reflections in puddles shifted independently of movement, and the way the fog seemed to part selectively, revealing glimpses of paths that had no logical origin. Each of these irregularities pressed upon a single realization, persistent and unspoken. They were navigating a space not meant for the living. Small villages appeared intermittently, their structures worn yet oddly preserved, as though time flowed differently here. Villagers moved with mechanical precision, eyes that could see yet did not acknowledge. A baker swept flour from his counter, motions repeated with slight variations, yet never fully interacting. Children skipped through empty courtyards, their laughter audible, yet vanishing entirely when approached. Wirt observed quietly, cataloging these oddities, while Greg danced forward, oblivious to the irregularities. It was as though the brothers existed in a dual layer of reality, one visible to all, yet imperceptible in essence. The forest, the villages, and the creatures within them seemed to measure them delicately, carefully, acknowledging presence without granting full life. The lantern atop the hill pulsed more insistently as they drew nearer. Its soft glow illuminated the mist in gentle waves, guiding without coercion. Wirt felt a quiet tension in its presence, as though it recognized something fundamental about him and Greg. The lantern's light was not merely physical. It carried a weight, an awareness, a subtle hint that the brothers' journey was existential as much as physical. It was a beacon not for the living, but for those caught between states, travelers whose souls lingered, whose consciousness persisted beyond the body. Greg, ever delighted by such flickering lights, ran ahead with unrestrained joy, yet even his laughter carried an otherworldly echo that lingered longer than it should, fading slowly into the mist. Nearby, spectral signs reinforced the subtle unease. Birds perched silently, tilting their heads in observation. A deer stepped into the clearing, eyes luminous, then vanished. Objects behaved peculiarly. A rocking chair swayed without wind, a broom brushed the floor in repetitive strokes. A window reflected not the present, but something older, ghostly, and faintly familiar. Wirt's eyes lingered on these signs, recognizing that the forest was not merely alive, it was aware, observing, and responding. Each anomaly, no matter how small, carried the same quiet message. The brothers were not fully alive, and the unknown itself was structured around this liminal truth. It was here that the first whispers of the beast's presence began to manifest, not in direct confrontation, but in subtle tension, a shadow at the edge of awareness. Shapes flitted between trees, and distant movements carried a sense of predation, though no creature revealed itself fully. The forest seemed to respond. Lanterns flickered slightly, shadows deepened, and a chill pressed softly against the skin. Wirt sensed the underlying order in these disturbances, recognizing that they were part of the forest's cautionary design. Even without seeing the beast directly, the signs were enough to remind them, and the viewer, that the unknown held danger as well as guidance, a mirror of the liminal space they navigated, a world aware of the departed, yet capable of drawing them toward peril if they lingered too long. As they continued, more villages appeared, each reinforcing the subtle rules of the unknown. Villagers moved with the precision of memory rather than life, their gestures repeated, their eyes vacant, yet observant. A child carried a small bundle of flowers, walking in a deliberate circle, only to vanish when Wirt and Greg approached. Objects shimmered with faint, ghostly outlines, as if reflecting the presence of souls. Wirt noticed that even the ground reacted differently beneath their feet. Footprints appeared briefly and then faded, leaving no mark, no evidence of passage. These were not ordinary anomalies. They were echoes, subtle signs that the brothers' existence was not entirely corporeal. The forest creatures offered similar clues. Birds tilted heads in unison. Small mammals appeared briefly to observe, then disappeared, and shadows flickered with a faint sentience. Wirt felt a growing certainty that the unknown was designed to test, to measure, and to guide those who existed between states. Even Greg, whose joy remained unaffected, moved through a world that acknowledged him differently than ordinary children. The forest's awareness, the lantern's pulse, and the ghostly villages coalesced into a single, haunting pattern. Wirt and Greg were walking not among the living, but among echoes of life, reflections of memory, and the subtle currents of souls lingering beyond mortality. In a quiet clearing, they paused beneath a gnarled oak. Lantern light spilled softly across the fog, illuminating the tips of misty branches. Wirt traced the texture of the bark and felt no resistance, no tangible weight. The sensation was subtle, but undeniable. The forest, the lantern, and the villages were attuned to their presence, yet they themselves were not fully recognized as living. The realization pressed gently upon him, quiet but insistent. The unknown was not merely a forest or a series of towns. It was a realm for those caught between life and what lay beyond, a space where existence was measured in subtle recognition, memory, and awareness, rather than in flesh, heartbeat, or mortal consequence. The forest thickened as night deepened, mist weaving around the trees like a living shroud. Lanterns, distant and faint, flickered intermittently, their glow pulsing softly, almost in rhythm with the subtle cadence of Wirt's cautious steps. The brothers moved together, Wirt scanning the shadows with a growing unease, Greg skipping ahead, delighted by the flickering lights that danced among the fog. Yet even in his cheer there was a faint tension, carried by the way the world responded to him. The forest's awareness palpable, observing both boys with quiet patience, as if recording their passage. Villages appeared intermittently, each one more anomalous than the last. A blacksmith struck metal with deliberate repetition, sparks arching but fading strangely mid-air. A baker kneaded dough with a rhythm that never faltered, yet did not acknowledge the brothers as they passed. Children chased one another in open courtyards, laughter ringing out, but vanished the instant a footstep drew near. These were echoes, fragments of human existence preserved in the liminal space of the unknown. The forest measured Wirt and Greg differently, acknowledging their presence but never fully incorporating them into its rhythm. Here, subtlety carried meaning. The boys were visible but intangible, observed but not fully engaged. Even the creatures of the forest acted in a way that hinted at a deeper awareness. Birds perched silently, tilting their heads, then vanished in the blink of an eye. A fox slinked along the edge of a clearing, pausing just long enough for Wirt to catch a glimmer of luminous eyes, then disappeared into the mist. The earth beneath their feet responded to their presence with gentle anomalies. Footprints faded, moss shifted imperceptibly, and small branches arched as if guiding their passage. These were not random disturbances. They were the subtle acknowledgement of beings who existed in a state between worlds, caught in the delicate balance of the unknown, a place designed for the departed yet navigable by those yet unaware of their own liminality. The lantern atop the hill pulsed more distinctly as they approached, its glow brushing the edges of the fog with warmth that was both comforting and unsettling. Wirt felt the light respond to his hesitation, dimming and brightening in soft, deliberate rhythm. It was a guide, yes, but also a mirror, reflecting a truth he could not yet fully articulate. The lantern was more than illumination. It was a vessel of presence, a subtle marker of souls, and a quiet reminder that their journey was existential, not merely geographical. Greg danced in its glow, oblivious to its significance, yet even his laughter carried an ethereal echo, fading more slowly than natural sound, hinting at a presence not fully aligned with the living. As they climbed the hill, the subtle foreshadowing of danger became more pronounced. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the fog-draped ground. A branch snapped somewhere in the distance, not with the weight of a falling tree, but with the deliberate precision of something unseen, something aware. The forest carried a faint impressions of movement that Wirt could not place, stirring an uneasy tension that was not overtly threatening, yet insistent. It was as though the unknown itself was reminding them, gently, persistently, that this world was not entirely benign, and that their presence, though acknowledged, was observed with caution. Wirt's eyes lingered on the villagers as they passed another cluster of houses. A woman hung laundry with precise, repeated motions, glancing briefly at Wirt as though she remembered him, then continuing as if he had never existed. A man walked past with a bundle of firewood, stopping momentarily, head cocked in recognition, then proceeding without further acknowledgement. Even the animals, birds, squirrels, and unseen insects, moved in patterns that suggested awareness, yet remained just beyond full interaction. Each subtle anomaly reinforced the growing realization. Wirt and Greg were not alive in the conventional sense. They moved among echoes, among preserved fragments of life, within a world that measured existence differently. The lantern's glow guided them toward a clearing where the fog seemed thickest. Wirt paused, noting how the mist swirled around their legs, then rose and dispersed, as though dancing to an unseen rhythm. Here the forest's awareness felt strongest. Shadows shifted along the edges of vision, moving independently of any source. Faint, half-formed shapes, perhaps memories of past travelers, drifted across the periphery, disappearing when directly observed. It was a subtle orchestration of space, light, and movement that hinted at a truth the brothers could feel but not yet name. The unknown was a world for souls between states, and they were traversing it as something other than living children. In the quiet of this twilight space, Wirt allowed himself a fleeting thought. Perhaps the unknown was not merely a forest, nor the villages merely illusory. Perhaps the forest, the lantern, and the spectral villagers were all instruments, designed to reflect, guide, and measure the presence of those caught between life and death. Greg's laughter, the flickering lantern, and the soft swirls of mist all carried subtle truths. They were travelers in a world designed not for the living, but for those lingering in the delicate balance of existence. And as Wirt looked ahead to the lantern on the hill, glowing steadily, he felt a quiet pull, not merely forward, but inward, toward understanding, toward recognition, toward the faint, insistent truth of what he and Greg had become. As Wirt and Greg continued their journey through the unknown, a subtle tension began to emerge, almost imperceptible but persistent, a presence that moved in the periphery of the fog. The forest, always patient and deliberate, seemed to bend its shadows more sharply, the mist curling into unnatural shapes along the edges of vision. Wirt's steps slowed instinctively. Even Greg's laughter faltered briefly, swallowed by the muted tones of the twilight woods. There was no immediate threat visible, no growl or rustle that could be identified, yet an undeniable unease pressed against the senses. This was the first tangible indication of the beast, a force that lurked not openly, but as an inevitable consequence of the forest's liminal laws. The beast, unlike the villagers or the shifting fog, carried intent. It was not a predator in the traditional sense, nor an entity of brute force, but a patient observer, a manipulator of shadows and whispers, feeding off hesitation and despair. Wirt could feel it indirectly, in the way lantern light flickered unexpectedly, in the gentle sway of branches that seemed to guide or mislead. The forest itself acknowledged the beast's presence, but did not intervene, allowing it to operate within a delicate balance. The unknown was a world that preserved, observed, and tested, and the beast existed to remind travelers that stagnation, doubt, or fear could be dangerous. It thrived not on violence, but on the suspension of movement, the failure to act, and the quiet despair that comes when one stops progressing. Villages, too, reflected the beast's influence in subtle ways. A child's laughter that should have echoed freely would sometimes dissipate abruptly, vanishing into the fog. Windows in the village houses reflected not the present, but distorted, elongated shadows that seemed to follow Wirt and Greg, stretching toward them in the faintest suggestion of menace. Objects appeared and disappeared in ways that defied logic. A rocking chair moving without wind, a broom sweeping of its own accord. Wirt observed these anomalies with heightened attention, sensing a pattern. The beast's influence was never direct, yet always present, shaping perception and movement, reminding travelers of the peril inherent in hesitation. The lantern atop the hill continued its steady glow, an anchor against the subtle manipulation of the beast. It pulsed softly as Wirt approached, reacting to the rhythm of his steps and hinting at guidance. For Wirt, the lantern represented more than light. It was a tether to understanding, a marker of recognition, and a subtle reassurance that even in the presence of the beast, the unknown offered direction. Greg, ever unaware of these dynamics, frolicked in the fog, chasing fleeting sparks of light. Yet even his joy carried an ethereal echo, a reminder that they existed on a plane different from ordinary children, caught between life and something beyond. As they ascended a gentle slope, the forest grew darker, the mist thicker, and the shadows more pronounced. Every movement carried weight, every step measured in the quiet rhythm of the unknown. Wirt noticed that the lantern's light intensified slightly as they moved, its warmth counteracting the subtle tension that emanated from unseen corners. It was here that the first direct evidence of the beast's strategy became apparent. A distant figure, entirely obscured by fog, seemed to mirror their movements, always one step behind, always observing, yet never fully revealed. Its presence was a warning, a test, and a guide all at once. A reminder that stagnation, in thought or action, could allow it to consume not the body, but the spirit. The forest itself seemed to conspire with the beast in quiet, intricate ways. Branches arched to create tunnels of shadow, obscuring paths that might lead forward, while the mist gathered selectively to obscure safe routes. Sounds became ambiguous. A distant twig snap might indicate an animal, a falling branch, or the beast itself. Wirt, attuned to subtlety, began to feel the weight of awareness pressing against him. The forest, the lantern, the villages, and the beast were all part of a delicate system, observing, guiding, and warning travelers of the consequences of hesitation. Greg's energy remained buoyant, yet even he paused when a shadow stretched unnaturally across the mist, a fleeting hint of something that should not exist in the ordinary forest. The interplay between the beast and the lantern became increasingly clear. The lantern pulsed, brightening subtly whenever the brothers moved decisively, dimming when hesitation lingered. Wirt sensed a quiet rhythm, light as guidance, shadow as warning. The forest's patience, the villagers' echoing gestures, and the pulsing lantern all worked in harmony, creating a world that was safe only for those who understood the delicate balance of movement and awareness. Here the beast was more than a figure of fear. It was a force designed to teach, to challenge, and to enforce the natural laws of the unknown. It fed not on flesh, but on indecision, fear, and stagnation, subtle, insidious, and persistent. Even in its quiet influence, the beast hinted at the fragile condition of Wirt and Greg themselves. The forest's anomalies, the vanishing villagers, the flickering shadows, the persistent echoes of memory were amplified in the presence of the beast. Each misstep, each pause, each hesitation carried weight. The unknown, in all its cozy eeriness, demanded engagement and forward motion. Wirt, with growing understanding, began to perceive the pattern. The beast was not merely an antagonist, but a reflection of the consequences inherent to being caught between life and death, between movement and stagnation, between awareness and oblivion. The beast was never truly seen in clear light. He existed at the edge of perception, between shadows and silence, between breath and hesitation. When Wirt thought he saw it, it was always uncertain. A faint figure outlined by fog, antlers stretching impossibly wide, eyes that gleamed not with menace but with knowing. It never lunged or chased. It simply waited. And that patience, more than any direct threat, unsettled Wirt most of all. Observers of the unknown might note that the beast is not a creature of chaos, but of design. He appears only when a soul lingers too long, when one's spirit grows heavy with indecision, when forward motion falters. He does not attack, he invites. He whispers promises through the wind, subtle and soft, that there is rest in surrender, that the forest can cradle the weary. But that rest is not freedom, it is stagnation, the quiet extinguishing of one's inner light. Wirt, though unaware of it consciously, began to sense the temptation beneath the beast's presence. Each time his resolve weakened, when fear of losing Greg overtook him, or when self-doubt filled his chest, the forest darkened slightly, as though the beast leaned closer. The fog grew thicker, the air colder, and the lantern's glow dimmer. Yet when Greg spoke, or when the faint echoes of laughter returned, the light pulsed again, defying the darkness. This rhythm of light and shadow became the language of the unknown itself. Motion sustains existence. Despair invites the dissolution. There is a quiet brilliance in how the unknown reveals truth. Everything within it, its trees, its echoes, its creatures, acts not as mere scenery, but as moral architecture. The beast is not evil in the traditional sense. He is the embodiment of entropy, of stillness, of souls that forget to move. The unknown, as some scholars might theorize, requires balance. For every guiding lantern, there must be a lingering shadow. For every spirit that ascends or moves on, another may falter, rooted in its own fears. The beast ensures that equilibrium remains unbroken. Greg's innocence shields him in a curious way. He perceives the unknown not as a place of threat, but of wonder. Where Wirt sees distorted faces in the fog, Greg sees playful shapes and friendly silhouettes. His laughter seems to disturb the beast, causing the shadows to retreat, if only slightly. It is not that Greg is stronger, but that he carries something the beast cannot feed on, pure, unburdened curiosity, hope in its most childlike form. And so, while Wirt wrestles with doubt, Greg unknowingly protects them both simply by remaining himself. In the deeper folds of the forest, the brothers encounter faint remnants of those who once lingered too long. Figures half-formed, leaning against trees, their outlines faint and shifting. They do not speak, nor do they move, but their eyes, if one looks closely, reflect the faintest shimmer of light. These are the souls who gave in to the beast's lullaby, who allowed fear or regret to anchor them within the unknown. Their presence is both a warning and a mercy, a testament to the choice every traveler must face. Wirt feels it then, a pull at the edges of his awareness. The forest begins to echo his thoughts back to him, subtly rearranged. You'll never find your way home. You were never meant to. The whispers carry his own voice, hollow and distant, emerging from the mist. The beast, though unseen, uses reflection as its weapon. It offers familiarity, comfort, and surrender. The moment one accepts the illusion, the moment one stops questioning, is the moment the forest claims them. Yet something curious happens. The lantern, steady, unwavering, flares with a warmth that breaks through the fog. The shadows ripple, and the whispers retreat. Greg, oblivious to the battle of wills unfolding around them, hums a tune and gathers a handful of fireflies. Their faint glow mingles with the lantern light, forming a soft halo around the brothers. The forest, for a moment, seems to breathe differently, calmer, gentler, almost protective. It is as though the unknown itself acknowledges resistance, rewarding the act of choosing light over stillness. From a distance, perhaps through the lens of an unseen observer, the scene is hauntingly beautiful. Two small figures, walking through endless mist, carrying their light. Around them, shadows twist and listen. The beast remains, always nearby, waiting not out of malice, but inevitability. For every soul that walks through the unknown must one day decide whether to move forward or fade into its quiet, endless night. And as the brothers continue deeper into the fog, the lantern's glow becomes more than a guide. It becomes a fragile symbol of what it means to live at the edge of death. A reminder that existence, in all its fragile warmth, depends not on certainty, but on the choice to continue moving, even when surrounded by ghosts. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to bend toward them, its tall silhouettes leaning in like listeners at a confession. The lantern light pressed outward in slow, concentric breaths, painting the trunks in amber before surrendering them again to blue shadow. Wirt's voice, when he spoke, sounded smaller here, the syllables absorbed by moss and mist. "Greg," he whispered, "do you ever feel like we're supposed to be here?" Greg only shrugged, smiling faintly as though the question were a riddle best left unanswered. "We're supposed to be somewhere," he said, and skipped ahead. That single answer lingered. Suppose they were supposed to be here. What then? The unknown, as it revealed itself, was a landscape of intent. Every object had purpose, every echo meaning. Even the still ponds seemed to listen, their surfaces trembling when words of doubt were spoken. The beast, unseen but perceptible, hovered around these doubts, coaxing them forward like embers fanned by wind. In several accounts of travelers, those few who have remembered the unknown after leaving it, the beast is described as a whisper that offers reason. He appears not to terrify, but to justify one's surrender, the end of striving disguised as peace. For those lost between worlds, that logic is dangerously soothing. To stop moving is to stop hurting. To stop hurting is to disappear quietly into the trees. The beast knows this truth and wields it gently like a lullaby. Wirt began to hear it more often now, the faint hum beneath the forest's breath. It came in fragments, his own doubts rearranged into persuasion. You've done enough. Rest. The fog thickened in response, curling around his legs as if urging him to sit, to give in. But then came Greg's laughter again, breaking the trance like a bell. The sound dispersed the fog in delicate ribbons, and Wirt felt the pull loosen. The pattern repeated, subtle and deliberate. Despair drew the beast closer, hope drove it away. There are theories suggesting that the beast is not a single entity at all, but rather the collective weight of lost souls who have forgotten to move on. Each traveler who surrenders becomes a fragment of its darkness, adding to the whispering chorus that tempts the next wanderer. If true, then the beast is both hunter and habitat, the living architecture of regret. In this sense, Wirt was not running from a creature, but from the possibility of becoming part of it. The forest, aware of this, shaped itself accordingly. Paths looping back upon themselves, trees leaning inward like hands trying to hold him still. At one point, Wirt noticed the faint outline of a face in the bark of an ancient tree. Eyes closed, mouth half open, in silent song. It was peaceful, almost beautiful, until he realized the bark pulsed faintly with light, like the glow of a trapped ember. The soul within had become wood, its spark absorbed into the beast's design. The realization struck him not with fear, but with sorrow. These were not victims of violence, but of forgetting. They had simply stopped moving. The lantern in Wirt's hands flickered again, as though responding to his thought. Its glow warmed, steadying his heartbeat. The beast's whispers quieted to distant static. In that still moment, the brothers crossed a shallow stream that reflected their silhouettes as two shapes of dim light moving through darker water. Wirt watched their reflections bend and dissolve, then reform, an echo of what it means to exist between realities. From an observational standpoint, one might say the unknown functions as a moral ecosystem. Light feeds on motion. Darkness feeds on rest. The beast maintains balance by ensuring that every hesitation has consequence. To live here, even half alive, is to participate in that system, knowingly or not. Wirt, though frightened, begins to embody its lesson. Progress is survival. He doesn't yet understand that this is the very law separating him from the faint, motionless figures among the trees. As the night deepened, a gentle wind carried the sound of a flute through the forest, thin, wavering, almost human. Wirt stopped to listen. The melody was mournful yet familiar, echoing something from his waking world. A tune half remembered from a classroom or maybe a dream. The beast's presence folded around it like shadow wrapping a candle. Music in the unknown is memory, and memory attracts the beast's curiosity. Wirt's heart quickened. Greg's humming joined the tune, off-key but sincere. The darkness around them seemed to hesitate. It was then that Wirt understood something crucial. The beast's power relied not on fear itself, but on isolation. So long as the brothers shared warmth, light, sound, laughter, the beast could not fully claim them. Together they disrupted the stillness the forest demanded. And perhaps that was the real defiance, not slaying the beast, but refusing to be silent in his presence. The wind whispered through the trees with the sound of distant breath, gentle and rhythmic, almost like the world itself was sleeping. Wirt and Greg walked in that strange twilight between motion and memory, the forest parting quietly to let them through. The lantern's glow swayed softly with their steps, its golden shimmer brushing against the mist like a painter's stroke on dark canvas. Every flicker seemed to call back some faint echo of the living world, fragments of laughter, echoes of footsteps, a door closing somewhere far away. Wirt began to sense that they were not entirely separate from the forest, that perhaps they were part of the same endless rhythm. The beast had no need to chase them because they already belonged to the unknown cycle. His role was not to hunt, but to wait, to nurture stillness in those who feared their own past. Wirt's hesitation, his constant self-doubt, made him a perfect target. The beast never needed to raise a hand. He only needed Wirt to stop believing that he could leave. In the stillness, the voice came again, not from behind, but from everywhere, quiet, persuasive, and sorrowful. "You've wandered long enough, little pilgrim. Rest now. There is peace in the trees." The tone was neither cruel nor demanding. It was almost kind, weary in its own way, as though the beast pitied him. That was the danger, the comfort of surrender. Wirt could almost imagine giving in. Letting the fog envelop him, letting the light fade, letting the world grow silent. It would be easy, it would be warm. But the forest itself seemed to resist the idea. The wind rose, scattering leaves through the lantern's glow, and somewhere behind him, Greg's voice broke the trance. "Come on, we're almost there." He didn't know where there was, but his certainty was enough. Wirt blinked, feeling the fog recede like water retreating from shore. The beast's whisper faded, replaced by the hum of distant crickets, faint but real. The forest's pulse steadied again, acknowledging motion, acknowledging life. Scholars of the unknown often describe this moment, this choice, as the point where travelers decide what they are. The beast cannot claim what continues to move, what continues to hope. His power is rooted in the stillness between decisions. That is why he lingers near crossroads, near lost travelers, near those who cannot forgive themselves. Wirt, though not yet aware of his death, carried regret like a weight. Every doubt was a root trying to hold him down. Every step forward was a rebellion. As they continued, they found a glade illuminated by scattered lanterns hanging from trees, faint and trembling. The air here felt warmer, as if the light pushed back the forest's hunger. Wirt looked up at one of the lanterns and saw something, a shape inside, small and moving, like a flicker of a soul. It was then he began to understand. The light wasn't just guidance, it was containment. Each flame represented a life caught between worlds, either preserved or trapped, depending on how one chose to see it. The beast's obsession with the woodsman's lantern suddenly made sense. It wasn't a tool, it was a vessel. The soul within it gave the beast power, sustained his form, allowed him to linger in a realm that should have long forgotten him. Perhaps he too had once been a traveler who stopped moving, a spirit who mistook preservation for peace. In that way, the beast and his victims were not opposites, but reflections of the same tragedy. The refusal to let go. Wirt's lantern flickered in agreement, casting long shadows across the glade. He watched the trees sway as if breathing, the leaves whispering secrets that almost sounded human. The beast's presence felt further away now, not defeated, but diminished like a retreating tide. It wasn't gone, just waiting for another opportunity, another moment of doubt. But for now, the forest allowed them passage. In the calm that followed, the viewer might notice how the unknown itself seems to respect those who learn. The fog lifts when awareness grows. The light steadies when truth is near. Wirt began to walk more confidently, Greg humming beside him, their steps synchronized like two heartbeats echoing through the mist. The danger had not passed, but understanding had reshaped it. The beast was no longer an invisible predator. He was a reminder of what waited when the will to move forward died. From a distance, the two figures seemed impossibly small against the endless forest, their light a mere spark in the dark expanse. Yet it was enough. In the unknown, even the smallest spark defies oblivion. The beast lingered somewhere beyond the trees, his form dissolving into shadow, whispering softly to himself, not in rage, but in patient curiosity. "We shall see," he murmured, as though speaking to the forest. "All lights fade eventually, but not tonight." Tonight, two faint lights continued moving through the fog, refusing to rest. The unknown had begun to shift again. The air grew warmer, the fog thinner, revealing stretches of quiet meadows and small, crooked cottages, scattered like pieces of memory half remembered. The forest's weight lifted slightly, as though the boys had entered a softer pocket of this strange afterworld, a place less about fear and more about reflection. Here the echoes of the living hummed faintly through the stillness, carried by the wind like forgotten lullabies. To an outside observer, the world might appear whimsical, even comforting, but beneath its quaint surfaces lingered something faintly mournful, the sense that these places were built from fragments of memory, not matter. The winding fences, the creaking windmills, even the scent of freshly baked bread drifting from invisible windows, all of it felt remembered. Not real. These were the remnants of life the brothers had left behind, reassembled by the unknown into shapes they could recognize, guiding them gently toward understanding. When the brothers met Beatrice again, she seemed less like a traveler and more like a guide. Her manner carried an undercurrent of urgency, her sharp wit concealing something sorrowful beneath. She scolded Wirt for overthinking, teased Greg for his endless optimism, yet there was tenderness in her irritation, as though she recognized something of herself in both of them. And perhaps she did. Beatrice, cursed into the form of a bluebird for a past mistake, mirrored the very concept of regrets. She was what Wirt might become if he allowed guilt to consume him, a soul transformed by self-punishment, unable to forgive herself. Beatrice's presence offered a form of contrast. Where Wirt hesitated, she urged him onward. Where he doubted himself, she refused to let him linger. She was the voice of motion, of learning from regret rather than being buried by it. In the context of the ghost theory, she can be seen as the externalized echo of Wirt's own conscience, the living embodiment of his desire to change. Every sharp remark from her, every impatient flutter of wings, was the unknown's way of pushing him forward, reminding him that the path out of darkness demands not denial, but acknowledgement. The woodsman, on the other hand, embodied a different kind of echo, the echo of sorrow. His endless task of keeping the lantern lit was not simply a punishment. It was a symbol of obsession, of grief preserved too long. He believed the lantern held his daughter's soul, and so he wandered endlessly, feeding it, afraid to let it go. But the cruel truth of the unknown twisted that love into bondage. The beast's voice had turned compassion into captivity, convincing him that to let the light die would be to lose her forever. Wirt's encounters with the woodsman were never violent, but heavy with warning. Each word from the man's weary lips carried the weight of years, the tone of someone who had long forgotten whether he was protecting life or prolonging suffering. To the careful listener, his story parallels Wirt's own subconscious fear, that if he stops carrying guilt, he will lose what remains of the people he loves. In this way, the woodsman is not merely a character, he is the echo of attachment itself, a soul defined by refusal to release. Every figure in the unknown seemed to hold this dual nature, at once their own entity and a symbolic reflection of something within Wirt and Greg. Adelaide, the so-called good woman of the woods, offered sanctuary but hid deception, mirroring Wirt's own instinct to trust appearances and his fear of being tricked. Auntie Whispers, who kept souls from being consumed, represented the thin barrier between protection and control. Each encounter was more than a step forward. It was a test of emotional growth, a mirror showing who the brothers were and what they might become if they remained lost. Greg's lightness, in contrast, was not ignorance but balance. He saw kindness where others saw danger, laughter where others saw despair. In the ecosystem of the unknown, that perspective mattered. It disrupted the logic of fear, creating ripples that even the beast could not suppress. The forest, the echoes, even Beatrice herself seemed to react differently around Greg, as though his presence reminded them of a time before regret, when existence was simple, when souls did not need to earn their peace. From a narrative perspective, this portion of the unknown reveals its design more clearly. It is not punishment, but reflection. The boys are not being chased. They are being shown. Each character they meet is a living fragment of something unresolved within themselves, a lesson rendered into human form. Beatrice, guilt. The woodsman, grief. Adelaide, deception. Auntie Whispers, control. And Greg himself, innocence. Together they form a psychological map, a constellation of emotion through which Wirt must navigate to rediscover not only his brother, but himself. The forest hums with this awareness. When Beatrice speaks, her wings leave faint glimmers in the air. When the woodsman strikes a match, the sound echoes longer than it should, as though the trees remember every spark. These details, subtle but constant, remind the viewer that everything here is alive in memory, not in matter. The unknown does not build worlds, it rebuilds the mind. As the brothers wander deeper into this reflection-built realm, the evidence of emotional design grows stronger. The unknown reacts to them not as a static place, but as a living, responsive environment. Its seasons change with mood. Its fog thickens when fear rises. Its light dims when hope falters. When Wirt becomes frustrated or anxious, the trees seem to lean closer, whispering with unseen voices. When Greg laughs, the clouds part, revealing soft rays of light that shimmer across the ground. The world is, in essence, a projection of their states of mind, not a purgatory of punishment, but one of perception. Consider the scenes where Wirt doubts himself, pacing through the cold with his cloak wrapped tightly. His words echo unnaturally, as if the forest repeats his thoughts back at him, distorted, questioning, almost sympathetic. This detail, easy to overlook, carries remarkable weight under the ghost theory. The unknown is listening to him. It responds like memory itself, fading, returning, and reshaping. It is the manifestation of an internal struggle, perhaps the last stage before letting go of the living world. Then there are the structures, homes, mills, schoolhouses that the boys encounter. None of them seem truly lived in. The doors creak too cleanly. The fires burn without smoke. and the inhabitants act like people caught in loops of forgotten stories. Even their voices carry a faint echo, a thin distance that suggests repetition. They welcome the brothers as though expecting them, and yet they never change after they leave. Each location resets, its rhythm continuing undisturbed, as if preserved for an eternal performance. The school town episode illustrates this perfectly. The teacher, Miss Langtry, sings of her lost love, surrounded by well-behaved animals dressed as children. It's a charmingly absurd image, but within the lens of this theory it reads as something else of frozen heartbreak, replaying endlessly. The children are symbolic stand-ins for innocence corrupted by disillusionment. The bell ringing, the recited lessons, the soft melody of her lament, all pieces of an emotional echo chamber. The unknown is filled with these rooms of regret, kept alive by memory itself. Even the little towns, so vibrant in color, seem to flicker at their edges when the boys leave. It's as if reality is sustained only by their presence, by their acknowledgement. This would imply the unknown is not a destination, but a state, tethered to the energy of wandering souls, a place that exists only as long as it is observed, as long as something lost still searches for meaning. And meaning in the unknown is never straightforward. The people they meet may not even be aware that they're echoes. Take Adelaide, she insists she's a helper, a provider of sanctuary. Yet when her secrets unravel, she seems to dissolve into her own web of lies, literally vanishing from the story as though her identity collapses once confronted. This vanishing act resembles what happens to memories when finally faced. They fade, their power diminishes, and the path clears a little more. Beatrice's story aligns with this too. Her guilt over cursing her family mirrors Wirt's paralysis when facing his mistakes in life. She is what guilt becomes when it cannot forgive itself, a soul trapped mid-flight, wings forever restless. But her journey with the brothers teaches her to confront that guilt, to risk honesty, even betrayal, if it means helping another soul find peace. She grows lighter in spirit as Wirt learns to take responsibility for his own fear. Their stories intertwine like two melodies resolving the same chord. And then there's Greg, cheerful, radiant Greg, whose imagination bends the unknown's rules effortlessly. His dreams shape reality, his words make things appear. When he wishes for coins, they fall from the sky. When he sings, even the most sinister beings hesitate to harm him. In this light, Greg represents the last trace of the living spirit, the untamed belief of a child that the world can still be kind, even when it's dark. He is hope personified, and hope in the unknown as real power. It's this interplay, Wirt's skepticism and Greg's innocence, that seems to keep the unknown balanced. Without Greg's light, the realm might collapse entirely into shadow, into the beast's control. Without Wirt's caution, they might never question what they see. Together they form the emotional equilibrium that the unknown thrives on. They are both alive and not alive, aware and dreaming, the perfect bridge between the real and the unreal. And perhaps this is the true nature of the unknown. Not a punishment, but a transition. Each soul must confront the echoes of who they were, and in doing so, release what keeps them tethered. The brothers' journey isn't about escaping monsters. It's about facing themselves through the eyes of others. In the next step of their path, the world will begin to unravel further, the edges fraying, the familiar warmth giving way to something colder, more revealing. The unknown will start showing its seams. What was once a comforting forest will turn into a mirror of final realization. That echoes fade only when the living let go. There's something quietly unsettling about the way the unknown begins to understand Wirt and Greg more deeply than they understand it. The forest no longer behaves as a random landscape. It starts curating their journey, arranging encounters with precision, as though it knows exactly which memories to evoke. Every lesson feels deliberate, every danger strangely personal. Even the wind carries hints of dialogue they've already spoken, replayed faintly as though the air itself is remembering them. This is where the boundaries between reflection and reality begin to blur. The unknown is no longer just a metaphor for death or limbo. It becomes the architecture of memory itself. The forest acts like a consciousness, a repository of souls that refuse to fade. And the brothers, unaware of their own spectral state, become part of its process, two wandering hearts replaying the final echoes of their living selves. Each symbolic encounter in this world represents a different part of that fading. The woodsman's obsession with the lantern reflects the human inability to accept death, the desperate act of keeping a flame burning even when it hurts to hold it. Adelaide's crumbling deceit mirrors the denial of truth, the illusion that control can stave off decay. Auntie Whispers embodies the fear of inner darkness, her hollow, trembling voice like a mother protecting her child from the monstrous thing inside, when in truth, both are the same. And then there's Beatrice again, no longer just a companion, but a reflection of redemption itself. Her arc teaches that forgiveness is what frees a soul from the repetition of regret. She helps Wirt see what he's been avoiding, that the true weight he carries is not fear of the beast, but fear of himself, of being the kind of person who fails, who hesitates, who hides behind others instead of leading. The unknown is not punishing him. It is patiently teaching him to forgive that boy he used to be. If one listens carefully, even the score of the show reveals this truth. The music of the unknown, the violins, the soft brass, the distant hum of lullabies always moves in circles. It never resolves, never ends with certainty. It loops like a soul circling a memory it cannot release. This circularity is deliberate, echoing the spiritual state of its characters. The melodies are tender but incomplete lullabies without homecoming. Only when Wirt begins to change does the music begin to shift, inching toward finality. There's a moment when Wirt stands alone, Greg sleeping nearby, and the forest feels almost kind. The wind is gentle, the light dim but golden, and for the first time, he stops walking. He listens. The sounds of the unknown, the rustling leaves, the creaking branches begin to sound familiar, like voices he once knew. He hears faint laughter, his mother's hum, the rhythm of footsteps on autumn leaves. It's as if the forest itself is revealing its source, all the memories of the living, collected and replayed, forming the very fabric of this place. The evidence grows clearer. The unknown is a liminal echo chamber, a realm built from memory's residue. The souls trapped within it are not there because they were evil, but because they are remembered. The living hold them unknowingly, keeping them half alive through memory, song, or grief. The woodsman's flame, Adelaide's schemes, Auntie Whisper's fear, all of it continues because someone somewhere has not let go. In this sense, even the viewer becomes part of the loop. By watching, by remembering, they sustain it. Greg's lightheartedness disturbs this pattern. His laughter acts like wind through cobwebs, clearing away old echoes. His games, his songs, his boundless trust, they are new energy entering an old, stagnant world. He does not live in memory, he lives in imagination. Where Wirt sees what was, Greg sees what could be. The unknown cannot truly hold him, because he does not belong to the past. He is the living spark that the realm cannot fully contain. In several moments, Greg's actions even rewrite the logic of this place. He creates life from nonsense, turns hopelessness into wonder, and reshapes the narrative's tone. It's as though he is unknowingly pulling Wirt, and perhaps the unknown itself, toward a moment of resolution. In psychological terms, he represents the acceptance of death as transformation, not loss. Through his innocence, the unknown begins to heal. But there's a cost. Light always draws attention in a world built on shadows. The beast begins to take notice of Greg, realizing that this child's energy threatens the fragile balance of his dominion. The darkness closes in, not out of cruelty, but preservation. The unknown cannot exist without echoes, and Greg's light threatens to quiet them. If memory fades, if forgiveness comes, the forest and everything within it begins to dissolve. As Wirt and Greg continue forward, the unknown grows quieter, almost reverent. The woods seem to watch them with a sense of melancholy, as if understanding that their journey is not one of staying, but of leaving. The creatures grow fewer, the towns vanish behind mist, and even Beatrice's voice starts to echo softer, thinner. It's as if the realm itself is preparing for their departure or their awakening. And yet, one presence remains constant. The faint, steady hum of the beast's song, somewhere deep within the trees. A reminder that while echoes fade, darkness always waits for silence. By now, the unknown feels less like a journey through a forest and more like a descent through layers of memory, each step peeling away a veil between life and afterlife, between illusion and acceptance. The further they travel, the more transparent the world becomes. Trees no longer stand solid. They shimmer faintly, like light reflected on water. Shadows behave independently, swaying even when the branches don't. Wirt senses at first a quiet unraveling, as though reality is politely making way for understanding. This is where the unknown shows its most haunting truth, that every soul within it is a story retold too many times. The woodsman's grief, Beatrice's guilt, Adelaide's deceit. They continue to exist not because they are real, but because they are remembered. Memory sustains them, keeps them breathing faintly within the fog. The moment they are forgiven, forgotten, or released, their images begin to thin, like breath on cold glass. The unknown is not only a resting place, it is the last echo of being known. And this idea that existence depends on remembrance casts a new light on Wirt and Greg's journey. They are not simply lost in a dreamlike forest. They are traversing the space between being remembered and being released. Their adventures are stitched from their own memories of life, the autumn chill, the distant school bell, the faint comfort of a lantern's glow. The unknown rebuilds these fragments around them, hoping they will finally see what binds them here. The symbolic figures they meet, each a mirror, each a warning now, feel like echoes drawn from their own consciousness. Beatrice's voice sounds eerily similar to Wirt's self-criticism. The woodsman's endless toil echoes his guilt. Even Greg's optimism becomes a form of guidance, an embodiment of what Wirt still has the chance to protect, or perhaps what he's already lost. The unknown teaches through repetition, through reflection. It asks, "Who are you?" when the world stops remembering you. This pattern is familiar in folklore, the belief that spirits linger until their stories are understood, until their emotions have been given meaning. Over the Garden Wall takes that timeless myth and weaves it into something intimate, a meditation on how memory and guilt shape identity. The realm is not haunted because it is evil. It is haunted because it remembers too much. The notion of symbolic characters deepens this view. Every inhabitant of the unknown performs a role not to move the plot, but to reflect a lesson. Auntie Whispers represents restraint. her bell a warning not to give in to the inner voice of despair. The highwayman whose song fills an entire tavern with unease is an echo of mortality, a spectral reminder that all stories eventually end. Even the animals that talk and sing carry faint traces of moral archetypes, like fragments of old fables retold by fading memory. In this way, the unknown functions like an ancient theater of the soul. Each act, each encounter, each eerie melody is a ritual of remembrance. Spirits rehearsing their own understanding of what it means to live, to err, to fade. The audience, both within the story and watching it, becomes complicit in keeping them alive. Every retelling of their story is another flicker of light in the forest. Wirt and Greg's passage through these echoes is a gradual purification, not of sin, but of attachment. As they face these reflections, they begin to accept what the living fear most, that everything beautiful, even life itself, must one day be released. In that release lies peace, not in holding on, but in letting go. The unknown, mysterious and melancholic, exists only until that moment of acceptance. And so, when Greg's light begins to fade and Wirt steps into the beast's shadow later on, it is not a battle of good versus evil, but of memory versus release. The beast feeds on remembrance on souls unwilling to let go. His forest thrives on the weight of what the living refuse to forget. But Greg's selflessness and Wirt's awakening courage threaten that entire balance. Their willingness to forgive themselves, each other, and even the world becomes an act of quiet rebellion against the eternal echo. The unknown trembles at this. The leaves fall in silence, lanterns flicker out one by one, and a stillness takes hold, not ominous, but peaceful. What was once a maze of shadows becomes a calm, endless field beneath a fading dusk. It's the moment between existence and memory, the final threshold. The echoes of the living have done their part. The hidden memories have spoken. The symbolic characters have taught their lessons. All that remains is the choice, to remain known by the forest, or to step beyond its remembering. And somewhere, faintly, as the lantern light dims, the narrator's voice returns calm, distant, reverent. Every soul leaves an echo. Some fade quickly, others linger until they are heard. The unknown listens still. The forest was quieter now. The fog, once dense and suffocating, thinned into silver ribbons that drifted gently through the air. The wind no longer howled. It hummed a soft, almost human melody, like a lullaby forgotten by time. Wirt and Greg walked slowly, no longer rushing, as though instinctively aware that something was nearing its end. The path beneath them had changed. It wasn't the same narrow dirt trail that had wound endlessly through trees. Now it looked like a mosaic of memories, autumn leaves scattered among stones, old boots half buried in moss, scraps of paper fluttering with faint writing that vanished when touched. Everything around them felt familiar, but not entirely real. The unknown had shifted again, as it always did when a soul approached realization. But this time, it wasn't rearranging itself into warnings or illusions, it was simplifying. The forest, the fog, the sky all reducing to their essence. It was as if the world was quietly tidying itself up, preparing for something sacred. Greg was the first to notice. "It's like the woods are getting sleepy," he said softly, looking around with his usual wonder. His voice didn't echo anymore. It simply existed, gentle and pure. Wirt didn't answer right away. He was watching the light, how it came not from the sky, but from nowhere in particular. It was even, calm, like the glow of an old memory revisited one last time. For the first time, Wirt didn't feel afraid. His usual anxious glances into the trees were gone. Instead he felt acceptance. A quiet understanding that whatever this place was, it was changing because they were changing. The unknown had been teaching them, guiding them through echoes of regret, through shadows of themselves. And now, perhaps, it was ready to let them go. Every sound felt significant. The rustle of leaves, the crunch of footsteps, the faint laughter carried by wind all seemed part of a larger rhythm, one that had been building quietly since the beginning. The unknown was not dying, it was completing a thought. The forest had been speaking in symbols all along, and now its voice was almost clear. The brothers reached a clearing wide open and bathed in amber light. In the center stood a single tree, its bark pale as bone, its branches stretching toward the dimming horizon. At its roots lay dozens of small, flickering lanterns, faint and trembling. Wirt realized each one resembled the woodsman's, though smaller, gentler, souls that had already passed through, perhaps. Each lantern seemed to hum with warmth, not sorrow. "This must be where everyone goes," Greg whispered, "when they're done being lost." Wirt looked down at his brother, a slow smile forming. There was no need to correct him. He was right not in words, but in spirit. The unknown was a place for the lost, but also for the found. Every wandering soul came here not to disappear, but to be remembered just long enough to accept forgetting. As they stood in the clearing, a light breeze stirred. The leaves rustled in patterns that almost resembled speech, and for a moment Wirt thought he heard voices, kind ones, familiar ones. It wasn't frightening anymore. It was like listening to a lullaby from long ago, one sung by someone who once loved you deeply and now was simply saying goodbye. The peace of it all felt heavy, not sad, but complete. The brothers had walked through fear, confusion, temptation, and loss. They had met echoes of their own hearts in the woodsman, Beatrice, and the strange creatures that haunted the edges of dream. And now, here in the heart of the unknown, all that noise was falling silent. The forest was no longer a maze, it was a threshold. A liminal space between two realities, one fading, one waiting. All that was left was for the brothers to understand which side of that threshold they truly belonged to. As they moved past the clearing, the path dissolved into something softer, no longer dirt or grass, but a surface that shimmered faintly, reflecting the world above like still water. Wirt could see the sky in it, but the sky itself seemed to mirror something else. Faint outlines of streetlights, rooftops, the vague geometry of a world he thought he'd left behind. He blinked, unsure whether it was memory or illusion. The shapes were too fleeting to be real, too familiar to be ignored. There, in the rippling reflection, he saw his old neighborhood street. The faint sound of wind chimes, the flicker of a lamp through a frosted window. Then it was gone, replaced by the slow sigh of the unknown's mist. Wirt didn't speak of it. He didn't want to frighten Greg, who was skipping ahead and singing to himself. The melody was different this time, slower, softer, almost reverent. Even the forest seemed to listen. The trees bent slightly toward him, their leaves trembling with something like affection. The deeper they went, the more fragile everything became. The edges of things, stones, trunks, lanterns, lost their sharpness. They glowed faintly, then faded back to shadow. The unknown was unspooling, thread by thread, as though it had finished its purpose. For the first time since their arrival, the air was warm. The chill that had clung to their clothes had lifted. The fog carried a sweet scent, wood smoke, honey, rain-soaked leaves. It reminded Wirt of home, though he couldn't remember which home exactly, the one from the real world, or the one the unknown had built for him. Perhaps, he thought, they were one and the same now. There was a strange calm in that realization. Maybe the unknown was never a separate place, but an in-between space, the heart's resting point between regret and release. It was never meant to trap, only to guide. And every lesson they had faced, the woodsman's sorrow, Beatrice's redemption, Adelaide's deceit, were fragments of this process. The world around them pulsed with memory. A distant bell rang, faint but distinct. The same sound that echoed through the school town once before. It repeated softly, not in warning, but in closure. It was as if each sound was saying goodbye. The animals, the towns, the lanterns, all whispering their farewells to the brothers who had walked their paths and learned their truths. Greg looked up suddenly. "Wirt," he said, "are we going home now?" Wirt hesitated. He wanted to say yes, but the word didn't feel right. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was a feeling. It was this moment, this peace. The realization filled him with quiet awe. "I think," he finally said, "we're going somewhere better." Greg smiled, satisfied, and continued humming. His voice carried through the mist, soft and steady. For a brief moment it harmonized with something else, another voice, faint and older, joining in from somewhere unseen. It might have been Beatrice, or it might have been the unknown itself, echoing their song one last time. The trees began to glow faintly with the rhythm of Greg's melody, their branches swaying as though bowing in gratitude. Every sound, every note, felt like the closing line of a long-forgotten story. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of running water began to rise, a brook, perhaps, or a river. Its murmur was hypnotic, drawing them forward. The air shimmered slightly with each step, as if they were walking through the last veil between worlds. Wirt felt a sudden heaviness in his chest, not fear, but longing. He realized then that he didn't want the unknown to vanish completely. Despite its strangeness, its shadows, it had shown him parts of himself he never would have faced otherwise. It had been lonely, yes, but also beautiful. He wondered if that was the true tragedy of passing on not the end itself, but the farewell to the beauty that came just before it. He looked at Greg, who was smiling up at the trees, unaware of the sadness quietly weaving through his brother's thoughts. And for the first time, Wirt didn't try to change anything. He let the moment be exactly what it was, imperfect, fleeting, alive. The forest song grew softer. The colors faded into dusk. The unknown was exhaling its final breath, guiding them to the river, the last threshold, where peace waited on the other side. The river appeared quietly, as though it had always been there, but had simply waited for the brothers to notice. Its surface was still, reflecting the amber of twilight and the silver of the sky beyond. The water's gentle movement whispered a soft cadence, a rhythm of finality. Wirt paused at its edge, letting the sound fill him, and for the first time, he felt an understanding he could not name. The unknown, so often threatening, so often oppressive, had become a teacher, subtle, patient, unyielding. Its lessons were woven not through force, but through reflection. Every path, every echo, every symbolic character had been a mirror for the brothers' souls. And now, at the threshold of the river, the culmination of all those reflections awaited. Greg squatted by the edge, tossing pebbles lightly into the water. Each stone created ripples that spread far, gently touching the trees on the opposite bank, illuminating them with soft luminescence. He looked up at Wirt, eyes wide and expectant. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said. Wirt nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Beauty, he realized, had been hidden in the unknown all along, in every shadow, every fog, every flicker of a lantern. Wirt's chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. The fear, the hesitation, the constant second-guessing, it all seemed to dissipate in the presence of the river. He remembered Beatrice's words, the woodsman's silent warnings, even Adelaide's trickery. None of it had been meaningless. Each encounter had shaped him, prepared him for this liminal moment. The unknown had not tried to trap them. It had tried to teach them how to move on. A soft wind stirred the surface of the river. Reflections shifted, showing fragments of the real world intertwined with the forest. A school bell here, a flicker of lantern light there, a distant memory of a warm hearth. Wirt's heart fluttered. The borders between what was living and what was remembered blurred beautifully, allowing him to understand that peace existed, not in clinging to one or the other, but in recognizing both. Greg pointed at the far bank. "Let's cross it," he exclaimed. There was no urgency, no fear in his tone, only joy and curiosity. Wirt hesitated a moment longer, then smiled, a small, unsteady smile that held relief, hope, and surrender all at once. He reached out, took Greg's hand, and together they stepped into the river. The water was warmer than he expected. It carried them gently, not like a current sweeping them away, but like a cradle guiding them forward. The ripples followed, fading softly, leaving the reflections of their past and present mingling across the surface. Each step seemed to release a memory, a regret, a fragment of self that had clung too tightly. And with every release, the unknown seemed to breathe softer now, calmer, as though acknowledging their understanding. As they reached the middle, Wirt glimpsed the faint shapes of the symbolic characters they had met. The woodsman paused, lantern dimmed but steady, as if nodding approval. Beatrice hovered silently, wings folded, her gaze gentle. Even Adelaide appeared for a moment, her form faint, reminding him that not all encounters were pleasant, yet all had purpose. Each one was a part of the pattern, a piece of the larger truth the unknown had been revealing all along. Greg laughed lightly. "It's like they're waving goodbye," he said. Wirt chuckled softly, though the sound held a quiet melancholy. Farewells always carried a little sorrow, he realized, but they were necessary. Each goodbye was a confirmation, a recognition that peace was possible when one accepted the impermanence of life and memory alike. The river's surface shimmered with golden light, and Wirt understood something profound. The unknown was not simply a place for the lost. It was a realm for understanding the self through reflection and connection. Its purpose was not punishment, nor even guidance in the strict sense. It was a mirror for the soul, and now the reflection no longer demanded fear or hesitation. As the brothers approached the far bank, the forest behind them began to recede, the fog lifting like a curtain drawn back. The echoes of the living and the memories of the lost blended into a soft hum that seemed to follow them. Wirt felt his chest swell with calm. They were still between worlds, still in a liminal space, but the tension had dissipated. The unknown had served its purpose. The lesson of movement, forgiveness, and acceptance had been imparted. In the distance, the faint outline of a light, soft, warm, inviting appeared beyond the trees. Wirt and Greg knew instinctively that it was the next step. Not home in the literal sense, but home in the spiritual one. A place where echoes fade naturally, where peace is earned not through escape, but through understanding. The river widened as they moved forward, its surface glowing softly with the fading light of twilight. The brothers' reflections shimmered beside them, slightly distorted, merging with the images of trees, lanterns, and distant lights from the world they had left behind. For Wirt, each reflection was a gentle reminder. The unknown had been shaping them not through fear, but through revelation. Greg's hand remained warm in his, and Wirt realized something he hadn't before he wasn't afraid anymore. The constant weight of hesitation. The obsessive self-questioning had lifted like mist in the morning sun. Every lesson they had faced the woodsman's sorrow, Beatrice's guidance, Auntie Whisper's warnings had served a purpose. He could feel the echoes of memory within him, acknowledging each encounter, letting them go in turn. The far bank drew closer, and with it, the symbolic figures they had met along the way began to appear faintly, watching them silently. The woodsman stood still, lantern in hand, the flame dim but steady as if nodding in quiet approval. Beatrice hovered nearby, her wings folding slowly, her gaze soft and reassuring. Even Adelaide appeared, her spectral form a reminder that not all lessons were gentle, but everyone was necessary. Their silent acknowledgement felt like a blessing, a recognition that the brothers had understood the truth of the unknown. It exists not to trap, but to reveal. The water beneath their feet felt warmer now, cradling them rather than carrying them. Each step forward released another fragment of fear, regret, or sorrow. Wirt felt the memories of the real world, the autumn streets, the school bell, the laughter of friends weave into the present moment seamlessly, neither overwhelming nor frightening. They were threads of life, not chains, guiding him toward the final threshold. Greg laughed softly as a flock of shimmering spectral birds rose from the river, circling above them before dissolving into the sky. "It's like they're cheering us on," he said. Wirt smiled quietly, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Even in a world built on echoes and shadows, hope had persisted, embodied in the unshakable light of his little brother. The edge of the river was near now. The forest beyond began to dissolve into gentle mists, the shapes of trees and lanterns softening and fading. Even the fog that had once felt thick and oppressive now thinned, revealing glimpses of an amber horizon. The unknown was not vanishing in hostility, but in quiet grace, making room for what lay beyond. Wirt stopped at the riverbank, looking back one last time. Every shadow, every echo, every spectral figure lingered for a moment longer, then began to blur into memory. The unknown had served its purpose. It had taught them to navigate fear, to face regret, and to embrace the gentle inevitability of release. Greg tugged at his hand, his small grin steady and bright. "Come on, Wirt," he said. "It's time." The final step across the river was not hurried nor forced. It was deliberate, a quiet affirmation of everything they had learned. The water rippled softly around their ankles, reflecting the fading lantern lights and the shapes of the forest one last time. Wirt felt a calm he had never known, a certainty that their journey was not an end, but a transition. Behind them, the forest, the lanterns, the echoes of memory began to dissolve into a gentle, luminous haze. The symbolic characters, Woodsman, Beatrice, Adelaide, and Auntie Whispers remained only as faint glimmers in the distance, nodding in silent acknowledgement. Their lessons had been absorbed, their echoes had been heard. Wirt glanced at Greg, whose optimism seemed to radiate warmth even here. "We're ready," Wirt whispered. Not a declaration, not a command, but a recognition of truth. The river carried them forward, no longer a boundary, but a bridge. The unknown was behind them now, not lost, but integrated, a part of memory, of learning, of release. The faint hum of its presence lingered like a song, neither haunting nor threatening, but serene and full of understanding. And as they reached the far bank, stepping out into the soft amber light, the forest finally breathed a final sigh. The journey through fear, reflection, and memory had come to its natural conclusion. The liminal space had done its work. The brothers had found peace. In that quiet golden light, it became clear. The unknown was never meant to trap, nor the beast to destroy. They existed to teach, to mirror, and to prepare the lost for release. And Wirt and Greg, holding hands, understood for the first time that peace comes not from returning to the living, but from accepting the lessons of memory, the beauty of echoes, and the inevitability of letting go. The riverbank was calm, the water glimmering faintly in the soft amber light of the approaching twilight. Wirt and Greg paused for a moment, letting the gentle current lap at their ankles. The unknown, once chaotic and suffocating, had transformed into something almost tender, like the hushed hush of a library where memories spoke quietly but with authority. Wirt looked at Greg, seeing him framed by the last glow of fading lanterns and the silhouettes of distant, spectral trees. Greg's small hand clutched his own, steady and unwavering. The innocence and certainty of his brother reminded Wirt that there was a way forward, that the next step need not be frightening. The threshold lay ahead. Beyond the river, the forest thinned into luminous mist, soft and inviting. Light warm, golden, and unassuming spread across the horizon, bathing everything it touched in the serenity of conclusion. It wasn't dazzling or sudden. It was a quiet kind of brilliance, a gentle acknowledgement that their journey had reached its natural end. The unknown had done more than test them. It had mirrored their regrets, their fears, and their virtues, shaping the boys' understanding of themselves through reflection and challenge. Every figure they had encountered, Beatrice, the woodsman, Auntie Whisper's Adelaide, had been an echo of what Wirt and Greg carried inside: grief, guilt, hope, and courage. Each character had quietly prepared them for this moment, the liminal point where letting go became possible. Greg, ever perceptive in his own way, looked at the river. "It's peaceful here, Wirt," he said softly. "Like everything's okay now." His words were simple, yet they resonated like a quiet bell in the air, signaling acknowledgement, acceptance, and readiness. Wirt closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling the scent of wet leaves and the faint perfume of memory. He remembered the autumn streets, the muffled laughter of friends, the familiar creak of his own home. These were fragments of a life that existed beyond the unknown, yet here they felt neither lost nor alien. They were threads of continuity, evidence that existence leaves traces, even when souls have moved on. A soft breeze swept through the mist, carrying whispers not menacing or urgent, but kind, like the gentle exhalation of a forest finally at rest. Wirt understood instinctively that these whispers were acknowledgments from the echoes they had met along the way. The woodsman's steady flame, Beatrice's fluttering wings, the faint glimmers of other spectral figures all signaled that the lessons had been learned, that the cycles of memory had been honored. As Wirt stepped toward the river's edge, the water shimmered, reflecting not only the amber sky, but faint traces of the unknown itself. The shapes of lanterns, twisted branches, and distant cottages merged into a tapestry of recollection, a final gift from a realm that existed to teach, not trap. Greg stepped beside him, his small feet creating ripples that spread and softened across the mirrored surface. Wirt's chest felt light, unburdened. The fear, the regret, the hesitation, all that had once anchored him here was dissolving. And yet there was no emptiness, only calm understanding. The unknown had revealed itself not as a place of punishment, but as a mirror of the self, a reflection of what must be acknowledged and released before peace could be attained. The far bank of the river, bathed in golden mist, seemed to pulse gently, as if recognizing the readiness of the brothers. Each step forward carried them not into oblivion, but into clarity, a crossing over that was both ending and beginning. The unknown receded behind them with a quiet dignity, every tree, lantern, and echo gently fading from form into memory. The soundscape of the forest softened. No creaks, no whispers of warning, only the delicate murmur of the river and the faint, almost musical resonance of completed lessons. It was the sound of a realm acknowledging its purpose fulfilled, offering rest not only to the brothers but to the echoes it had sustained for so long. The river's surface flowed quietly beneath Wirt and Greg's feet, reflecting the soft, warm light that spread across the horizon. Each ripple carried faint echoes of the unknown, the trees, the lanterns, and even distant voices. But these echoes were no longer insistent or threatening. They were memories being laid to rest, softly fading into the fabric of understanding. Greg hummed a tune, low and simple, his small voice blending with the rhythm of the water. It was a melody that seemed to harmonize with the unknown itself, coaxing it into gentle surrender. Wirt listened, feeling the tension in his chest ease with every note. For the first time, he felt truly unburdened. Fear, regret, hesitation, all had been acknowledged, and all were allowed to dissolve. The figures that had shaped their journey appeared one final time, not as obstacles or guides, but as witnesses. The woodsman stood at a distance, lantern dim but steady, a silent nod conveying approval. Beatrice's wings fluttered faintly, light spilling like liquid across the mist. Adelaide's form lingered briefly, her expression soft, an acknowledgement that even mistakes and deceptions serve purpose. Even anti-whispers appeared, her trembling voice replaced by calm stillness, as if the forest itself had forgiven. Each acknowledgement felt like a release, a quiet confirmation that the lessons of the unknown were complete. The brothers were no longer merely travelers through a mysterious realm. They were participants in a process of emotional and spiritual resolution. Every encounter, every challenge, every shadowed corner had been part of their preparation to cross over fully, to step from memory into peace. The far bank of the river, bathed in gentle golden light, grew closer. The mist parted softly, revealing a horizon that was neither frightening nor alien, but tenderly familiar. It was a space that existed beyond fear and hesitation, a threshold where the echoes of the past could dissolve without loss, and where the present could be fully embraced. Wirt glanced at Greg, who grinned faintly, the warmth in his eyes radiating reassurance. "Ready?" Greg asked, though he already seemed to know the answer. Wirt nodded, feeling a quiet certainty he had never known before. There was no need for words, only understanding that stepping forward was the final act of letting go. The water flowed gently around them as they moved, carrying not only their physical forms, but the weight of accumulated memories, fears, and hopes. Each step was deliberate, a small affirmation of acceptance. The unknown, no longer a looming presence, seemed to breathe with them a quiet exhalation of completion and release. As they reached the midpoint of the river, faint glimmers of their previous encounters shimmered around them, lanterns floating softly, the trees bending in silent acknowledgement, shadows dissolving into the water. These fragments were not threatening. They were gifts, gentle reminders that the unknown had been both a teacher and a mirror, reflecting the parts of themselves that needed recognition before peace could be achieved. Greg laughed lightly, a sound that carried far across the river. "It's okay, Wirt. Everything's okay now," he said. His words were simple, but they resonated like a bell, ringing softly through the space that had once been filled with shadows and uncertainty. Wirt felt the truth in them, the weight of fear and hesitation lifting completely. The brothers approached the far bank, the light growing warmer, softer, embracing them without pressure. The unknown faded behind them with quiet dignity, the mist dissolving, the echoes of memory blending into stillness. The forest, the lanterns, and even the shadows had done their work, offering rest, closure, and understanding. And in that calm, Wirt realized something profound. Peace was not found by returning to the living, nor by escaping the unknown. It was found by embracing what had been, accepting what could not be changed, and trusting that the lessons of memory and reflection could guide them into serenity. The far bank drew closer with each careful step. Wirt could feel the subtle change in the air, a lightness he had never known, a gentle exhalation of tension from the unknown itself. The ripples of the river flowed around them, carrying reflections of fading lanterns, distant cottages, and glimpses of spectral trees. But none of it felt threatening. Each image was a quiet farewell, a recognition that their time in this liminal space was complete. Greg skipped ahead slightly, glancing back to ensure Wirt was following. "It's not scary, right?" he asked, voice soft but confident. Wirt smiled, a slow, steady smile that carried relief, understanding, and surrender all at once. "No," he whispered. "It's peaceful." The forest behind them began to dissolve more noticeably. Shadows lifted, and the mist thinned into ribbons of silver light, revealing hints of the horizon beyond. The unknown, which had seemed so vast and unknowable, now felt intimate, personal, almost tender. Every encounter along the way, the woodsman's grief, Beatrice's guidance, Auntie Whisper's trembling warnings had led to this moment. Each character had played a role, quietly preparing the brothers for the crossing. Wirt looked down at the river. The surface reflected both the past and the present memories of the real world, intertwined with the soft luminescence of the unknown. Autumn leaves drifted along the current, fragments of distant streets, a school bell faintly tolling somewhere in memory. He realized that peace didn't mean erasing these things. It meant accepting them, letting them exist without fear or regret. The glow ahead grew warmer. The far bank was no longer simply land. It was a space of quiet light, welcoming yet gentle, signaling that the journey's purpose had been fulfilled. The echoes of previous lessons, laughter, sorrow, hope, mingled in the air, coalescing into a serene harmony. It was not a realm of judgment, but of understanding. Greg's hand found Wirt's again. "We're almost there," he said. The words felt like a promise, a steady anchor as Wirt's chest lifted and tension released. They stepped forward together, the water carrying them like a cradle, soft and reassuring. The ripples faded behind them, leaving a smooth, reflective surface that seemed to absorb the memories and lessons of the unknown. Figures they had encountered along the way shimmered faintly one last time. The woodsman's lantern dimmed but remained steady, a silent acknowledgement of Wirt's courage. Beatrice hovered briefly, wings folding, her gaze conveying pride and release. Even Adelaide and Auntie Whispers appeared, distant but gentle, confirming that the cycle of reflection and understanding had been completed. Wirt inhaled deeply, tasting the faint scent of autumn leaves, wood smoke, and rain, the essence of memory itself. He realized the unknown had never been a prison, nor had it been malevolent. It had been a mirror, reflecting the parts of themselves that required attention, understanding, and eventual release. As the brothers neared the far bank, the light enveloped them fully, soft and golden. The mist lifted entirely, revealing the horizon, not ominous, not alien, but serene, welcoming. The unknown had done its work. Every echo, every shadow, every whisper had guided them here, to the threshold between reflection and rest. The river, the forest, the lanterns, all began to fade gently, leaving nothing behind but soft golden light. The brothers had crossed not into an ending, but into clarity. And in that quiet, Wirt understood the profound truth of their journey. Peace comes not from escape, nor from fearlessness, but from understanding, acceptance, and the gentle letting go of what no longer serves the living or the memory. The last steps onto the far bank were unhurried, deliberate, and gentle. Wirt and Greg stood side by side, feeling the soft ground beneath their feet, the warmth of golden light brushing their faces. The river behind them rippled once and then stilled, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting faint traces of the forest, lanterns and shadows that had guided them here. For Wirt, the sensation was profound. The tension that had clung to him for so long, fear, guilt, hesitation, had finally dissolved. In its place was calm, an understanding that the unknown had never sought to harm, only to teach. Every encounter, every spectral figure, every shadowed path had been a lesson in recognition, forgiveness, and acceptance. Greg bounced lightly on his heels, his grin bright in the soft amber light. "We did it, Wirt," he said dry. His voice carried no fear, only the wonder and joy that had defined him throughout their journey. Wirt smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. For the first time, the forest behind them felt distant yet intimate, like a cherished memory that could now be remembered without sorrow. The figures they had encountered shimmered faintly one last time. The woodsman's lantern glowed softly, a final nod of approval. Beatrice hovered nearby, wings folded, her gaze serene. Adelaide's form flickered briefly, no longer a threat, but a reminder that even mistakes can serve purpose. Auntie Whispers seemed to exhale in quiet relief. Each figure acknowledged the brothers' passage, their silent approval, a benediction for the lessons learned and the peace attained. Wirt looked around, taking in the fading forest, the dissolving fog, and the stillness of the river. The unknown was no longer a realm of fear or confusion. It existed now purely as memory, a tapestry of echoes, lessons, and reflections that would remain intangible, yet everlasting. It was not gone, merely transformed, a quiet guardian of understanding that lingered beyond the veil. The light on the far bank deepened, warm and inviting, not bright or intrusive, but comforting. Wirt felt the subtle hum of the realm, a resonance that was neither threatening nor demanding. It was the sound of completion, a gentle affirmation that their journey had reached its natural conclusion. Every shadow, every flicker, every whisper had found its purpose, and now the brothers were free to step into the serenity that awaited. Greg tugged at Wirt's hand. "Let's go," he said simply. And Wirt, with a slow, deliberate breath, allowed himself to follow. Their steps carried them forward over the threshold, into the quiet light where the echoes of the unknown softened into memory. The forest, the lanterns, the shadows all began to fade gracefully behind them, leaving only the warmth of recollection. The unknown had fulfilled its purpose. It had reflected the truth of the soul, guided the lost, and prepared them for release. Its presence would endure not as fear, but as wisdom, a subtle reminder that memory and reflection are part of the journey, even for those who have moved beyond the living world. Wirt and Greg stood for a moment on the far bank, hands clasped, hearts light. There was no finality in the sense of loss, only a quiet serenity, a sense that everything had unfolded exactly as it should. The unknown had taught them courage, compassion, forgiveness, and acceptance, not through instruction, but through experience. And somewhere, faintly, as if whispering through the threads of memory, the unknown murmured, "Every soul leaves an echo. Some linger longer than others, but all are remembered." And even as they moved beyond, Their lessons endure, shaping the world they leave behind. Wirt looked at Greg, whose innocent smile radiated calm certainty. Together they stepped fully into the light, not as lost travelers, but as souls reconciled with memory, understanding, and peace. The unknown remained, quietly waiting for the next wanderer, the next lesson, the next echo eternal, patient, and serene. And in that final moment, the brothers understood it completely. Life, memory, and peace are intertwined, and even in the eerie quiet of the unknown, there is always room for resolution, rest, and the gentle crossing over. And with that, Wirt and Greg's journey through the unknown comes to a quiet close. May the echoes of their lessons linger, and the mysteries of the forest stay with you, softly in your mind. If you found yourself lost in the unknown with them, subscribe and stay for the next story waiting just beyond the fog. Good night from the other side.